After 3, we're going to talk about Ukraine more. We haven't really had conversations about Ukraine for a while. We've done some news reporting about it, but I haven't had a conversation with you about it for some time. And it seems to me that with the dreadful assaults on those eastern cities in the Donbass region, with Sergei Lavrov saying in an interview just overnight that they stand firm. They intend to carry on. They had no alternative but to go to war in this way. His words, not mine. They had no alternative but to go to war in this way. You've had that very high-profile visit from 3 Western leaders, 3 European leaders to Kiev yesterday. Of course, the American element in all of this is very important too. So we'll talk about that in more detail after 3 o'clock. I'd love to have conversations with you again about it. But joining me now to do so is Cormac Smith, former strategic communications advisor to Pavlo Klimkin when he was Ukraine's foreign affairs minister. Cormac, good afternoon to you.
Sheila, good afternoon to you. Lovely to join you again.
What's your sense of how long this public cohesion, anyway, on Ukraine can last?
I'm concerned, to be honest, that it's slipping. One, Ukraine is slipping down the news agenda, and 2, as we have increasing hardships at home with fuel prices and cost of living and so forth, people's attention is going to turn closer to home than it is to Ukraine. But we absolutely must keep our focus on Ukraine, because this is not just an aggression or a war against Ukraine. It never has been. It's against the entire West, and it will not end with Ukraine. And unfortunately, that's not landing sufficiently in the West at the moment. But
that this is aggression that will spread?
That this is aggression that will spread. Putin made a speech last week where he compared himself to Peter the Great.
He did.
And he said that, this could be a 10 or a 20-year war. And, he was preparing his people for a long wait. He said, at the end of this, everything will be better. But there's always this myth that there is no hardship too great for the Russian people to bear. So I think with that speech last week, Putin has completely stripped away the fables which Lavrov, the liar, is still pumping out about this not being a war, this being a special military operation.
To stop NATO encroaching on Russia.
To stop NATO encroaching and to denazify Ukraine and all of that absolute garbage which they come out with. But I think if you listen to Putin last week, we know that this is a good old-fashioned war of conquest, and it's about Russia taking back the lands that they feel are rightfully belong to them, that have been taken from them over the centuries, and more recently in the last century with what, quite frankly, he regards as blunders of the Soviet Union.
And of course, President Putin, he's spoken today, hasn't he, claiming that the real interest, this is what he's been saying, that the real interests of people in Europe, you and me, are being sidelined after Ukraine moved a step closer to EU membership. So he's saying there, the people of Europe need to pay close attention to how their own leaders are responding to this war, because it will do them no good.
Sheila, I've been saying since 2016 that Ukraine, when I first went out to work with the Ukrainian government and started making friends in that country, that while Ukraine definitely needed the West also needs Ukraine. And the West needs Ukraine, in my view, for something that many of us seem to have lost or come to taken for granted, just a value for freedom and democracy and what it costs. I mean, your forefathers, I'm sure, and certainly mine, fought in the Second World War to help defeat Hitler. And this is an evil every bit as great as was Hitler between 1939
but they did in the
1945.
first. Not Hitler, obviously, but they did in the first. Yeah,
no, I'm sorry, I had 3 uncles from one family.
Irish Free State wasn't in. yeah.
No, but I'm sorry, I had 3 uncles from one family who were all in the British forces.
Yeah, and a lot of Irish people did fight, didn't they? Yeah,
that's
despite
right.
the neutrality. Right, Putin's again saying this war was forced on us. Protecting our people in Donbass. The West is continuing to pump Ukraine with weapons. I mean, you can't argue with the last bit. We are pumping Ukraine with weapons,
and so we should be.
Well, the big question for certainly for Joe Biden, and he is perhaps the most significant voice in all of this from the Western perspective, is for how long and what weapons?
Well,
what do you say to that? For as long as it takes, and any weapons?
My view, and the view of former US General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Commander of NATO very recently at a Kiev Security Forum, said effectively, my words, not his, but he said we should give the Ukrainians every single weapon they ask for and need, including F-16s and A-10s, which are aircraft, which we're still not giving them. He said we should give Putin no off-ramp and no sanctuary behind his own borders. And the third thing he said, we must not be intimidated by Russia's nuclear threats. Sheila, I have to remind people a country is being destroyed at the moment. Russia currently occupies 20%. We have heard of the most unspeakable atrocities being carried out by Putin's troops, not just against women, against children and babies. Tens of thousands of people of innocent civilians have been slaughtered. Whole cities have now been razed.
But what you've just said, when you've been quoting General Wesley, sorry, remind me of his surname.
Wesley Clark.
Wesley Clark. When you've been quoting him there, I mean, they shouldn't be safe behind their own borders. What, bomb Russia?
I think absolutely. I mean, if Ukraine needs to hit Russian supply lines behind Russian borders, which why should they not be allowed to do that? It's fine for Russia to come in and obliterate and destroy Ukraine. Anything. This is a defensive war for Ukraine. So why should Ukraine be contained to only fighting on its own land? This didn't happen during the Second World War. We didn't say that to fight Hitler, we couldn't go and bomb Germany. Churchill said...
But you do realise, I hear what you're saying, but you do realise the implications of that, don't you? Or the potential implications of that. Because Putin, in an instant, describes that as American and Western weapons landing on their heads in Russia. Not Ukrainian weapons.
Well, Sheila, this is a country that... This is a country that lies... Yes, he will. This is a country that lies on an industrial scale. And they do that as part of their hybrid war against not just Ukraine, but the West for the last 8 years. I was speaking to a very good Ukrainian friend. In fact, Alexei Mikheyev, you had him on the show about a month ago, their special envoy on sanctions. And Alexei quite simply said, if Ukraine wins this war, there'll be no war. If Ukraine loses this war, there will be no Ukraine. It has been made abundantly clear that this is a genocidal war. Putin wants Ukraine without Ukrainians. A good friend told me this back in 2016. I didn't quite believe it then.
Well, they're handing out Russian passports to people, aren't they, in the eastern cities?
Absolutely. And I think the question is for a country that in many ways, I lived there for 2 years, is absolutely at the heart of Europe in terms of its culture and its people and its values and its aspirations, if we can stand by in 2022 and watch a country being genocidally butchered the way Ukraine is, from a country which has very, very clearly made its intentions clear that it does not intend to stop at Ukraine. And if we have any doubts of that, we need to speak to the people in the Baltic states. Okay. We need to speak to the people in Poland and other areas. We need to see the world through Ukrainian eyes and through the eyes of people who have grown up and lived with this threat.
Okay.
We're too far away and we're too comfortable, Sheila.
I have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Cormac, for speaking to me today. Cormac Smith, former strategic communications advisor to Pavlo Klimkin when he was Ukraine's foreign affairs minister. We'll talk more about Ukraine and the West and Russia after 3 o'clock here on LBC. Get your calls in.